In September 2018, the US government was contacted by Professor Phineas Corbin of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration concerning a particular incident in the Antarctic involving several graduate students, one of whom was a former protege of his at the University of Southern California. The incident he described involved sentient beings traditionally referred to as a ninjin by Japanese whalers. Their existence in the public, while widely debunked as fiction, is in fact truthful. However, they were long thought to be extinct. The US government's knowledge of these creatures extends more than 8 decades into history, beginning with an encounter known only as the New Brunswick Incident in 1924. Acting on this information, a Department of Defense task force was assembled under the code name Operation Trident and dispatched to an area near the Antarctic, known as a breeding ground for these creatures. The outcome of this mission was never released to the public, and it has been kept under lock and key at the request of the Central Intelligence Agency. The following account was written by a competent and sober sailor with over 10 years' experience in the US Navy. We're looking in the wrong direction for intelligent life. As we speak, remote-controlled rovers and high-powered telescopes are scanning millions of square miles of dusty Martian terrain for some sign of life. Beneath our oceans, there are things that would marvel you and terrify you at the same time. Things that we share an uncanny bond with. I enlisted in the US Navy just a few weeks after graduating from college, with a degree in marine biology and a minor in oceanography. And despite the narrow scope of study with an undergraduate degree, I knew a few things about the sea, but nothing could prepare me for what I would encounter. Coming from a small California town, near the coast, you can appreciate that the sea has been a big part of my life since learning to swim at a relatively young age. I spent some time overseas in Afghanistan in non-combat roles, but I really distinguished myself doing humanitarian aid missions to the Caribbean. My performance impressed some of my squad commanders, and before long, I was assigned to a special Department of Defense task force along with a group of academics and researchers from various universities in the UK and the US. I remember the briefing being one of the strangest ones I had ever attended, as I, along with my 300+ squad mates, were required to each sign not one, but 2 memorandums of understanding not to divulge anything we would learn in the next hour. I remember it to this day. Our commanding officer was a short, squat bulldog of a man. He was a veteran of 100 conflicts, some that you've never heard of, a few that didn't even happen according to official government logs. Many of the men in the large auditorium didn't fit the regular army look. Many of them had scraggly beards, wild hair, scars on their faces, and a few were even missing teeth. Special Forces. Antonio nudged me. Of course, Antonio isn't his real name, but let's just call him that for now. He was one of my squad mates and one of the best friends that somebody could ask for. He, like myself, was curious as to the secrecy behind this briefing. Alright kids, before it was pilots and sailors, lending a helping hand in hearts and minds, but this time is different. Some of you, and most of you, in fact, aren't going to be familiar with this goat rodeo. The CO said. His cold blue eyes seemed to have a light of their own under the projector light. I looked at Antonio and he just looked as curious as I was. 2 years ago, a research vessel containing close to 20 scientists and grad students from the US disappeared for 2 weeks within the Antarctic Circle. The vessel with a total of 3 survivors were found aboard what was left of said vessel, while their colleagues suffered a terrible death. Pausing before continuing, I could see he took this very seriously, as most other things. Now, the official story given to the relatives of the deceased and to the media through our channels was the vessel and all aboard ran into intense weather and struck an iceberg, with most of the crew dying on impact and the remainders dying of hypothermia, with the exception of the survivors, of course. Gentlemen, I am here to tell you that story was total bullshit. Pausing again, I could see the old man taking a deep inhalation before continuing. We have reason to believe, and a damn good reason at that a species of semi-sentient underwater creatures were behind this particular attack. He must have seen the curious glances and raised eyebrows, even in the dark of the auditorium, because he spoke up. I shit you not, ladies. If what has been available to me through the CIA and Navy archives, this is not our first tango with these things either. For a long time, they were considered extinct, but at least one of them is still alive, and that is why you all are here. At 0400 hours, we will be leaving California and going to Heard Island. In this instant, our primary objective will be to escort and offer protection to a group of civilian researchers. I repeat, not to engage as they try to make contact with this thing. In case you don't know, Heard Island is one of the few land masses in the world located quite literally in the middle of nowhere. Technically, an Australian protectorate, it's uninhabited most of the year within the exception of penguins and seals. And if you're curious about what we're looking for, well, here's a sneak peek. With the press of a remote, the slide changed from a map of Heard Island to what I originally thought was the carcass of a beached beluga whale. But that was before I noticed the arms. Holy Christ! Someone at the opposite end of the room exclaimed. It was dozens of feet long, beached on a rocky coastline. Its pale blue skin looked sickening as its human-like eyes bulged from their sockets. Where ventral flippers were supposed to be, I saw were two toned, muscular arms protruding out of the torso, above which lied what I could only describe as a massive human head. Its body ended in a large tail, almost identical to a sperm whale's. It was so unnatural. I was revolted, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it, as I saw dozens of harpoons sticking out of its back. This is what you are up against, boys. We don't know what they are, how long they've been here, but make no mistake, they are not human. They will kill you and eat you the first chance they get. This big bastard washed ashore in Argentina sometime in the 80s. I don't know what crater of hell these things popped out of, but we will send them back to the depths from which they came, or die trying. The room erupted with cheer from the men. Goddamn, I don't need Cialis as much as I think I do. Before we dismiss, let me introduce you to the scientist leading this goat rodeo. Professor Sam Hawkins from Eton College. He has a lot of experience in this sort of thing, and he'll explain further on what he intends to get out of our trip. A tall, slender man, possibly the same age as the CEO, took the podium. He looked frail, almost sickly, and he spoke in a heavy Cockney accent. Right. Myself with 10 other researchers from various institutions will be leading the expedition. Like the goodly admiral said, your purpose in this expedition will be purely for escort and protection. Under no circumstances are you to engage these creatures. The admiral stood behind him, and I could see his wrinkled face twist into a scowl as Professor Hawkins said what he did. We will be aboard our own research ship equipped with various instruments at the bleeding edge of underwater monitoring, along with an unmanned drone to allow for clear resolution. Gentlemen, your role in this affair, I mind you, will be purely reactionary, and I stress under no circumstances will you be required to engage unless threatened? I felt some disgust at his last remark. I've heard of incidents of various military operations across the globe where that very same bullshit rules of engagement policy rapidly escalated the number of casualties of US servicemen. Within the next 48 hours, I along with Antonio were aboard a US Navy frigate, with 3 others in a research vessel on our way to one of the coldest places on Earth. Like other modern warships, our vessels were equipped with all necessary weapons. Everything from guided harpoon torpedoes, missiles and cannons to 50 caliber machine guns and rocket-assisted torpedoes. Despite this, each vessel also came equipped with 4 massive harpoon guns, mounted to the port, the starboard, the stern, and the bow. When I was on the deck, I would often walk past the harpoon guns and stare at them. I wondered if all our other weapons failed, what good would an oversized fish knife like this do for us? As if on cue, I heard a voice behind me. You know what's the secret to the harpoon, right? I turned around and I saw one of the scruffy Special Forces soldiers standing behind me, with what looked like a mixture of an odd grin and a scowl etched across his scarred face. Pointing to the black pointy fixture at the tip of the harpoon. It's a plastic explosive. Japanese whalers have been using them to catch whales a few years back. It's supposed to explode on impact at the fat bastards. I guess we weren't taking any chances with these things. The soldier introduced himself as Max. Whether it was his real name or just another alias he used, I'll never know. But we became close friends on the expedition. He told me that this wasn't the first off-the-books expedition that he was a part of. That such unexplained occurrences that needed a swift, quiet resolution were happening with more frequency as of late. More than being a friendly face on watch duty, Max made me think. I distinctly remember on one occasion, he asked if everything that we were doing, from the Amazon fires to our rampant pollution and global warming, was awakening things that otherwise would have left humanity alone. It's sort of like when you lift up the heaviest rock in your mom's tomato garden. You see all sorts of squirmy, wriggly, nasty things. Maybe that's us right now with all this pollution. Just lifting the rock to see what's been here all along. In the days and months that followed on our journey, I couldn't believe what we were on our way to do. What we would encounter. Part of me felt proud and was excited to see one of these things up close. But then I remembered the black and white picture what the Admiral had showed us in the briefing room, and I felt a shiver course through my body. I remembered its bulging eyes and massive, bizarre frame. Even dead, it looked menacing. And I thought that it wouldn't be too bad if we could get through this mission without coming too close to one. As we approached Turd Island, the climate dramatically changed. Almost every waking hour, we had to wear our parkas. The coldness hurt your nose and throat. It was unbearable, but I soldiered on. We finally got to Herd Island in the afternoon. Heavy gray clouds hung overhead as we first sighted the rocky coastline. The first reconnaissance unit went aboard with amphibious assault vehicles and hovercrafts, setting up a base of operations complete with communications equipment within minutes. I assisted in coordinating the movements of supplies from the frigate to the island. On the water, I couldn't help but look overboard and wonder whether these things were just beneath us, and how easy it would be for one of them to snatch our vessel out of the surface of the water. The thought of it made me shudder more than the biting cold Antarctic wind could. While on the island, we used shortwave radios to communicate. It wasn't a very large island, so we made a full sweep on armored personnel carriers and other vehicles within 24 hours. Our CO didn't lie. Being on Herd Island was an eerie experience. Not much by way of vegetation. It was hundreds of square kilometers of rolling volcanic soil. A real no man's land. The lack of pretty much anything and the gloomy gray clouds that seemed to hang perpetually over the island and surrounding icy waters filled me with a sense of uneasiness and dread that I couldn't quite put my finger on. There's a reason this place is uninhabited, Antonio said, breaking my concentration. I looked over to him. He looked really funny with his white parka zipped up all the way to his eyeballs. Men aren't supposed to live out here. It could drive somebody insane, he said, clutching his M4 to his chest. For the first week, everything was pretty boring. Besides keeping watch and assisting with the movement of supplies, there wasn't much else to do. From the coastal observation post, I could see the research vessel deploying what appeared to be white spheres that sank beneath the surface and out of sight. They looked like Chinese paper lanterns, but I later found out that they were sensors, equipped with a 360-degree camera and other doodads. They dropped them all over the coast and further out, apparently to keep closer tabs on whatever the hell we were out there hunting for. Hours later, at around 11 p.m., we had our first encounter with those things. From what we gathered via communication with the frigate that was anchored out at sea, there was a confirmed reading from the research vessel. They were describing it as up to 40 meters in length, and that it was swimming further beneath the surface, so it didn't pose a threat to the vessels or the coastal installation. From the tents, we could see the vessels on the horizon. With a pair of night specs, I could see the research vessel take a violent hit as if struck by a cannon. It tipped to its side, and for a second, I thought that it would begin taking on water, but it regained its balance. Frantic voices and static filled the comms tent as Lieutenant Granger tried to decipher what was being said through the radio. "More than one," was all I could hear. And it was enough for us. I looked back over to the once calm sea, and I saw the delicate waves now turned choppy and rolling. Through the specks, I saw what I originally thought were chunks of ice poking up from the surface of the water. But after squinting, I saw that they weren't icebergs at all. They were white whale-like tails, and I could swear I also saw something that looked like a massive head, one or two peeping out through the water. Even the huge, heavy frigates began to move. But before I could think of anything, the dark Antarctic sky lit up for almost a straight 5 minutes as the thundering sound of the rats filled the air. Even from the coastline, half a mile away, I could feel the shockwave of a massive cannon as a volley of explosions were heard, sending rocket after rocket beneath the surface. Before the sky could return back to darkness, I could hear over the radio the faint sound of moaning. It sounded almost pitiful, and it had an odd human-like quality to it. "Frigate 2 Coastal Command, we have a confirmed hit. They're returning back beneath the surface. Stand by for instructions." From the comms tent, we could hear crosstalk between the research vessel and the frigate, and based on what we were hearing, Professor Hawkins was none too pleased with the explosions. Of course, eavesdropping on a conversation between a senior officer commander was an offense, punishable by court-martial, but I didn't care, and neither did the lieutenant as he stood there glued to the radio, listening to the argument. "God damn it, Admiral. What the hell did I tell you about your role in this mission? Purely observational. That could have driven them further underwater where we can't reach them." Hawkins charged. "Don't lecture me on rules of engagement, Sonny. Those fat fucks almost sank both our vessels if I didn't take action." "They wouldn't have done that," Hawkins interrupted. "How the hell would you know that, Professor? Have you been clear with us on the nature of this mission? You've been awfully secretive on all the details leading up to this. Suddenly, the radio cut to silence. Did they know that we were listening in on them and they switched to a different frequency? I saw the lieutenant check the radio cables, but they all seemed to be connected. What happened next stays with me to this day. The CO's voice returned, but it was much more frantic. Holy Christ, man. I need sights on the starboard deck. I rushed out of the tent in time to see what I could only describe as long, thick white tentacles climbing up the side of the frigate, rapidly moving up the side of the ship. Using my binoculars, I could see something else. The head of what looked like a beluga, but it wasn't. There was nothing whale-like about that head, or that face. It had a human face, the face of a fat man, complete with eyebrows and all that hung over deep, sunken eyes. But the worst part was the mouth, which I swear was curled up into the most awful grin imaginable, revealing rows of yellow teeth. What the hell was I looking at? I muttered to myself as I saw the ship shaking violently. In the distance, I could hear screams beneath the Antarctic wind, as my heart skipped a beat. The bodies of sailors along the deck began dropping into the water. I saw the thing press its face against the hull, its huge mouth wide open but still curled in that twisted smile as it caught two of the sailors in its mouth. Without warning, two loud explosions filled the night air, as there was temporary light again. The two frigates fired a volley of anti-submarine torpedoes and 50 caliber rounds at the thing. I could hear a thundering roar, like a long, loud gargle as the tentacles quickly slipped off the ship's railings. The head, once smiling jovially, twisted into an awful look of pain and anger mixed together, distorting the blubbery, fat face in ways no human face should be able to move. The longer I looked at this thing, the more it looked like a sick joke from God, a parody of life. From the comms tent, I could hear the lieutenant calling me. "You have to hear this." Rushing over, I felt like I was walking on a dream after what I had just seen. No sooner had I entered, I could hear something. It over the radio. It sounded like talking. At first, I thought about asking what language this was, and then I realized what I was listening to. It was no human sound, but it was definitely a sentence. They were words. They sounded as if they came from someone who was trying to hold a conversation underwater. A lot of gargling and blubbering, but they were strung intelligibly. In the days and nights that I've returned to the US, I've thought about those words. Those are not words that any human tongue should or could reproduce. I've typed it several times into Google Translate's language to text software, but they don't come up with anything. They sounded like Manjo Kavik, Borg skin. Maybe it was just gibberish, and I tried writing down more of the words, but before I could scribble all of it down on a notepad, I could hear the Admiral's raspy voice over the radio once again. "Look alive, ladies. We have one heading towards the coast. Be prepared to take evasive action." Looking through the specs again, I saw a huge mass of white barreling towards the coast, just a few meters from the shore at this point. "Take cover, you moron!" I heard the lieutenant yell to Antonio as he tried to duck behind a pile of rocks near the water's edge. But it was too late. Just about a kilometer away from where I stood, I saw it burst from the water, dragging its massive body ashore on two large flabby arms that must have been at least 10 feet each in length. I could see a network of what I thought were blue, spindly veins just beneath its pale flesh. It was hideous, like an awful caricature of what a human should look like. It snorted and it grunted, eventually finding Antonio as he tried to press himself against the crevice in the rocks. All I remembered hearing was a barrage of gunfire from his carbine, and awful screaming as the thing lifted my friend into its mouth. I winced as I heard the muffled screams from that thing's fat throat, still alive as he was being chewed and swallowed whole. Then in an instant, I saw its head turned, and for a brief moment, I saw its bulging black eyes. It might have only been for an instant, but I could feel a chill, the absence of anything even remotely related to humanity. What the hell was I looking at? Where did this thing come from? I saw its flabby lips curl, revealing blood-stained teeth with chunks of flesh and clothing stuck between them. And then another volley of gunfire from behind me, as I heard the screech of a rocket. The thing lifted its arms as it tried to move forward. Its lower torso didn't end in legs or a long tail, but in dozens of thick, long tentacles. The rocket missed as it reached for me. The explosion of the shell snapped me out of my stupor as I darted behind the firing line and towards the tent. I could hear the lieutenant ordering the men to keep shooting as I could see streaks of blood appear across the thing's body. With another vaguely human roar, I saw it collapse with a heavy thud. As it breathed its last breath, I could hear what I thought was soft muttering from its throat. Despite having murdered at least 3 of my fellow sailors, one of which was a close friend, I felt a strange kind of sympathy for it. As I looked at its entire body, I saw where the torpedo had hit, leaving a deep, wide gash. When our field commander made the necessary head count, there was only one casualty: Antonio. I felt shell-shocked, like I was in a dream, and I would wake up in a VA hospital at any second. But the biting cold of the Antarctic was my only wake-up call. That and the scent of gunpowder and sulfur that seemed to ooze out of this dead thing's body. We spent the next few months on this island, tracking and monitoring these things. In that time, we only had 2 actual engagements with them. One at sea, where the ships fired an anti-submarine torpedo at it when it tried to ram the research vessel, and another on the land. The encounter on land was more bizarre as we saw it do something. In biology, I was taught about a genetic phenomenon called polymorphism, which basically describes a change in an organism's appearance, sort of like the kind of physical differences you'd see in species of jaguars and so on. When chasing one of these things that flopped out of the water, I saw a long whale-like tail being dragged behind it. But as we caught up to it on the armored personnel carrier, I swear I saw it. I saw it grow legs. I will probably need a psychiatric evaluation by the end of this, but the other men in the carrier can also swear to it. The tail from its torso and it grew 2 long legs before sprinting over the snow and disappearing. Through the scope, I scanned the horizon looking for it, but I couldn't find anything. How the hell am I going to write this in the field report? I heard one of my squad mates mutter in the personnel carrier. We all looked to the lieutenant, who looked equally perplexed. We all saw the same thing. Nothing fancy, and don't get cute with it. Just write what you saw and we'll back you up. We loaded the corpse of the thing into the frigates after clearing camp, using a makeshift pulley system. We cleared camp and put this godforsaken experience behind us. Despite the initial tantrum, Professor Hawkins seemed more or less pleased with the outcome. He seemed convinced the surviving creatures, which he believed amounted to no more than 3, retreated to deeper waters. But no theory could explain the strange language we heard or even the experience we saw with the sprinter. The strange thing is leaving the island. At least 7 sailors who were involved in the firefight with the creature reported having nightmares. Always the same one, being trapped by the creature in the same spot, and being eaten and digested slowly. All of the men were confined to the sickbay with only medical staff present. Naturally, the commanding officers try to keep this quiet, but when you're aboard a ship, things tend to leak. We were all sworn to secrecy. After our mandatory field reports and one-on-one interviews with several high-ranking officials describing the events, we were separated. We were never given a full picture of what we encountered, what they were or where they came from. I never saw Max again, but ever so often, I remember something that he told me, causing me to think long and hard. He said over time, scientists have often believed that humans had an aquatic phase in their early evolution, that somehow we had adapted to survive underwater from an early ancestor, and maybe that's what those things were. A distant cousin. But maybe they were something else. He said scientists always thought that those things were just a species of human that adapted to live and survive as whales. Did it ever occur to the scientists that it might be the opposite? A species of whale that adapted to live and look like humans. It was absurd, no doubt about it, but what was the alternative? If a civilization of people could melt ice caps by the millions in a lifetime, what was the alternative?